I pondered this episode for quite a while, wanting to deliver content that to help each of you to step up to the next level. You're the activists, role models, teachers, and rule breakers, the social commentators, leaders, thought provokers, the healers, and inspirers. You experiment, question, try on for size, and promote. You innovate, create, you share, and live life bolder than ever before. And so I've chosen someone today to join me on the Love Life show who is the epitome of high self-confidence and self-worth. It enables him to be the bold role model to his own personal catch cry of, ordinary is the enemy.
Welcome to Love Life, featuring your host, Jane Donovan.
The sun shines bright as it moves across my face. I feel the light.
Ordinary is the enemy. And that's the catch cry of my guest today. I introduce you to the wonderful Sputnik. My first question to Sputnik was, where did he get this brilliant sense of self-confidence and self-worth from? This confidence enables him to be a very bold observer of life and publisher in any media possible, whether it's social media, the print media, radio, television. He's putting his bold message out there.
The first thing I need to comment on is self-confidence and self-assuredness and all those things, because it's kind of a newsflash to me that I have all of those things.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and you know, it's not a newsflash in the sense that I know that I'm able to stick my neck out in certain ways that other people haven't or wouldn't. But, you know, it's a fragile facade at times. You know, there's always, you know, I wrote a thing on Facebook yesterday, right, which was a bit of a bearing of the soul. And, you know, I was riding my bike a little bit, doing a few errands. So I was kind of going over in my head the things that had happened during the day. And I was thinking, I could write about this. This could be quite cool. And, you know, I sort of imagined some of the sentences and thought about some of the things. And it's a bit like when I'm running or riding my bike or having a shower, anything is possible. But when I actually go to do it, I think, who the fuck am I to think that I could do that? Or is that going to work, or will people give a shit? So
is it almost like in that moment when you're writing it in your head, when you're on the bike or you're in the shower, you completely tapped into your heart, you completely tapped into pure intent. And it's like you catch that inspiration, you catch that creativity, and then there may be a break between that moment and when you actually get onto the keyboard to do it. And then your head gets in the way.
Yeah, and look, and it's hard because for people who don't know, my background is in advertising and marketing, and at various times my role is, let's just call it creative director. But part of that job is to be the most critical bastard on earth. You know, it's to look at every single piece of beautiful creative work and not go, oh, that's beautiful and creative. It's to go, what can we make better about it? Where's the weak point? What's the focus is to look for flaws, right, as a professional.
I would never have picked that in your energy, because it's certainly not that in private.
And I remember being at a Tony Robbins event in about 1996. So we're going back before he was on Netflix, before there was a Netflix. And I remember him talking to someone in the crowd. This was in Hawaii somewhere. And he was talking about someone whose job was as a lawyer. And they were talking about relationships. And I remember there's little snippets that I remember like it was yesterday. And they said, your problem is you're acting like a lawyer when you go home and you're interrogating your partner.
Ah.
And I always thought, that's a thing for me. I've got to make sure when I go home, I'm not a creative director or someone whose job it is to pick flaws in things.
Right, and tell you how you could do it better.
So, you know, it's like when you come home and you're 12 and you do a test and you get 9 out of 10 and your dad as a joke goes, oh, what happened to the other one? Yeah. You know, and he thinks he's being funny.
Yeah.
But retrospectively, with more consciousness now, we know that that's incredibly shit, right? You know, and there was no intent, there was no, you know, all that stuff, we get it. But retrospectively, we know that sends a pretty awful message at times. So one of my challenges, A, has always been don't be that person at home.
Yep.
And B, the bigger challenge is don't be that person to yourself sometimes. So, you know, every time I write something, think something, you know, I do go into edit or creative director mode and go, hang on a minute, is this worth putting out into the world?
I was curious to know if Sputnik had a way of editing himself to know when to put something out into the world and when not to. Because I think we've all been guilty at times of sharing something and then wishing we could retrieve it. Or, of course, the flip side is of wishing that we had the courage to put something out there and regretting the fact that we didn't.
So I'm a runner, but very quickly I got into running marathons and ultra marathons. So a marathon, the standard marathon is 42.2 kilometres. An ultra marathon is anything above that. So I'd be off in the trails in the Blue Mountains or in New Zealand running a 100-kilometre trail race, right? The problem with that is you start to mix with people who run 100-kilometre trail races. So when you talk to them, when you talk about running 5 or 10 kilometres, that seems shit and trivial. Whereas you talk to a regular person and they go, oh my God, I could never run 5 or 10 kilometres. So, your yardsticks, you've got to be careful that you don't choose a yardstick that is really off kilter. So, with whatever you're doing.
Being aware of who your audience is or who it is that you're wanting to communicate your message to.
Yeah, not to normalise extraordinary. I think it's all right to normalise it if that's what you aim for, but when you go to write something, I suddenly hold myself against Tony Robbins and go, if I can't do it as well as him, I better not bother. Which is why I gave that analogy. I eventually got to my point. But,
So I've forgotten Tony Robbins had come into the story.
Yeah, there's a guy called Mike Rowe who does, World's Dirtiest Jobs or something, was one of those TV shows.
Right.
And whenever he does a post, I read it and I just feel sick in the stomach. Oh, I wish I could be that eloquent. And so sometimes I feel like it's not worth creating something or putting my opinion out into the world unless I can do it on that scale. And of course, if everyone thought that, then only one person would do it. Of course, I've always got those doubts and fears and, self-questioning and all those things.
Sputnik's a serial entrepreneur. He really is a game changer and somebody who just thinks completely different and out of the box. He even dresses differently. In fact, when I first met Sputnik back in the 90s, he was presenting as a very eye-catching kind of cross between Adam Ant and Boy George. But I asked Sputnik about his businesses. They're quite inspiring.
My core business, which is my background, which is advertising marketing. So I have a business called Out of This World, which I still do, which is a marketing consultancy.
I remember meeting you. You were the consultant for a job I was working on, and I just went, again, in comes the cool dude. It's all right, Jane, you've got this. You can hold your own. I also met Sputnik at an advertising art directors awards evening.
Which is tomorrow night, by the way. Funnily enough. Yeah,
okay, well, please let me ask, what is it you're wearing? Because it won't be a black dinner suit for a black tie event, I can assure you. Have you thought about it yet?
No, I'm rocking I shouldn't make jokes. I'm starting, you know how you're not allowed to make jokes about anything?
Yeah.
I've been making jokes that I'm rocking the homeless look, and certainly not making light of homelessness. But I haven't had a shave or a haircut for quite a long time, so I'm not
It's doing
looking
the
like
natural and looking fabulous.
Bit caveman. So what will I wear? It's black tie every year, and every year I wear, I don't know, jeans or some sort of my Sea Shepherd t-shirt or whatever.
It was definitely jeans, but it was something really out there again. And it was so the advertising or the art director awards every year the watering can.
Yep.
So they have this award. Tell me if I'm wrong on this, buddy. Yep. A watering can that is given to the most outstanding talent?
Look, no, it's not. It's not the outstanding talent. Otherwise, I would never have gotten close to it.
Very humble.
But it's for outstanding contribution to the industry,
right?
In some way, yeah.
Now, this year that I was involved in, they have a very elaborate, crazy way of presenting this watering can every year, and I think that year I had a heap of can dancers coming out to present it. And Spuddy was the recipient. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, you were the youngest recipient ever?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Okay, well, I do. That's what was going around the room that night, so he was the youngest. And that just says that from a very early age, you were different. You definitely did things differently, you thought differently. And at that point, I think you were working for one of the big ad companies.
The story behind that, if I can just sort of jump in there, is that generally speaking, that award has been given to someone for primarily core advertising or design work over an extended period of time. And my award, I'd love to, tell everyone that's what it was for, but it wasn't really. I came up with an idea 5 or 6 years ago where, because we're based in Adelaide, and our industry is very Melbourne and Sydney centric, so very
we're considered a country town.
Correct. So most of the trade press doesn't actually really talk a lot about what goes on in Adelaide. And I'm a huge fan of Adelaide. I think there's some amazing things here and some great talents. So I came up with this idea, why don't we have our own dedicated news website for our industry? And I remember going to one of my business mentors and saying, I've got this great idea. And he said, how's it going to make money? And I said, it's not going to make money. And he said, well, why would you do it? And I said, because it needs to be done. And to me, that just seemed like a given. And at the time, business was pretty good, so I could afford the time and the energy to put into it. So I ran that business for 5 or 6 years. And the reality is, yeah, I've done some interesting work in my time in the business, but that award was predominantly for, I guess, that website and giving the industry a voice and an identity and an outlet and a
Again,
platform.
nobody else was doing it. And we have always been in Adelaide, the little rural country town to the big Sydney and Melbourne. So huge kudos. But you bring up an interesting point, though, that you mentioned, well, it's not going to make money. And you've got another business that...
Oh, yeah, none of my businesses make money. Is that a criteria?
but I love that, because I know so many of the Love Life Tribe, the listeners are so passionate about what they do. And yet a lot of people focus, in my opinion, on the money aspect. But if you focus on the joy, if you focus on your passion, and you're really hitting your ground doing your best work with it, everything else just falls into place. Now, maybe you could be making a 6 or 7 figure salary instead of a 5 figure or whatever. However, you will always make enough for whatever abundance it is that you're wanting in life. Intent is key to everything we do in life. And I notice in the following conversation that intent appears to be important to Sputnik. However, I was curious to see, how is it that he can get so bold in his intent?
I'm an agitator and a boat rocker and a wave maker and a trailblazer and all those sorts of words that we use in the Swashbucklers Club, but always with good intent. And in fact, to blend two stories, when I won that watering can, and this is a horrific piece of my history, the next year the person who won it, I thought the decision to award it to that person was really flawed for a certain number of reasons.
Right.
I loved the person who won it. I thought, that person was amazing, but they gave the award on some really weird criteria.
Right.
And so I questioned it quite publicly, and it kind of went nuclear. And my intent was good, but I think in retrospect, it was a really poor thing. But generally speaking, my shit stirring, if we want to call it that, is
let's not call it your activism or your
to produce
awareness of different thought process.
Thank you. Yeah, to produce a positive outcome or a constructive outcome of some sort. So the Swashbucklers Club was born out of, I read an article in about the mid-90s, and it was an advertising guy called George Betsis who, along with a couple of other people, had come up with this thing called the Swashbucklers Code. And they wrote this little 11-point code that they were on their way to Greece, and they were, it was the 90s, they were like madmen advertising guys. And it's not the manifesto that we use now. So they used to have a code, and it was quite specific, and it was like, I devote at least 10% of my time to creating unforgettable adventures. I have a sparkle in my eye, a swagger in my walk, and fire in my loins. Bit of a piss take. And so I approached them at the time, but that code really spoke to me.
Yes.
So I approached him at the time, and I said, look, I know this was just a bit of a piss take, but can I pilfer that and create a thing called the Swashbucklers Club? And, we're going to build a whole club around it. And at the time, I didn't know what the club was going to be. And 20 years later, I still don't.
It's evolved a lot and changed.
Yeah, and but what I did was I didn't want to use his code out of kind of respect, and also it didn't quite fit where I was sort of going. So I did write a manifesto, which didn't have things like fire in my loins, because, women were going, can I still be a swashbuckler if I don't have fire? Anyway. So,
which a couple of those are, I've got this gorgeous, I've got it here. We celebrate the things that make us different and the things that make a difference. We dream big, aim high, reach far, and believe in the relentless pursuit of wow. Love it. And there's a whole heap more. We'll get to those through the show.
Yeah. And by the way, for anyone who's never written a manifesto, when you read them, it's very easy to like them or be critical of them. Fuck, it's hard to write one that doesn't make you sound like a complete dickhead.
Because there'd be so many angles to it. They're big statements. They're very big statements. But, your boldness in your words, and that was one of the many beautiful reasons I really wanted you to come on the Love Life show, is because so many of our listeners they're teachers, leaders, and healers. Mm-hmm. And their words or their presence, whether it's on YouTube or blogs or Facebook or podcasts, they are living life boldly. However, I think they'd really get a lot out of you by knowing, how do you get to be so brave in what you write? You're bold. You're very bold. you're compassionate, it's well thought out, your thoughts are well presented with consideration for the against, yet there's the fors, yet it's brilliant activist work and thought-provoking work that really does motivate people to read and think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points that I'd make to that. I mean, the first one is I wrote a little, I guess you call it almost like a meme once, and I said, you don't have to be awesome to do awesome things. It's doing awesome things that makes you awesome. They need permission or need to get to a certain point to be able to do something. And of course, to me, I think it's vice versa. I think, practicing is doing it, and
that's a great point, because it's like I get a lot of emails and private messages from people saying, I've really realized that, I really want to be working in the coaching field and always helping my friends, but I can't get in to do this course until whatever. And my advice is, well, you're already doing it. So stop saying you want to be and just start saying I am.
Yeah, I mean, it's imposter syndrome to a certain extent, isn't it? So, I remember going to a film conference once and saying, I don't feel like I belong here. And they went, you've got imposter syndrome. And I went, I've never heard this term before. Since then, I've heard it a little bit. But I think there's in some people, and perhaps not your listeners, who are probably a bit more conscious and evolved than, the average Joe, but I think sometimes we think we need to get to a certain point or have a certain endorsement or a certain qualification before we can feel qualified to have an opinion.
I think that would be all of our listeners, including me, because we move into different fields. There's areas that we might feel like we've got the PhD in, and then there's other areas that we feel like we're in kindergarten, and when we're trying something new, creativity, which you are the king of, the hand-in-hand partner to creativity is fear.
Yeah, and look, I mean, and for me, it's just, it's fake it till you make it a little bit, and maybe there's a couple of subtleties in there, like be humble. You don't have to go out and go, I'm the expert and the king of the world. Yeah. I think you can ease your way into it, and to this day, I wouldn't look at anything I do and go, I'm the best at it or I'm the greatest at it. After that Facebook post yesterday, for me, I put that out into the world, and I have a thing called the audience of one. Right, so let's bring a few different thoughts together, right? So I have a thing called the audience of one. I have businesses where I may or may not give a shit about making money. The reason I said I worry about smug people, because I think it's really easy for people with money and a safety net to say, just do what you love and the money will follow.
Yes.
Yeah, and I get that
yes.
Some people are quite spiritual and they've read The Secret or whatever, and they think checks are magically going to turn up, right?
Yes.
My personal theory, and I've never seen this written anywhere else, so if I've knocked it off, I apologise. But the law of attraction, to me, it's not a coincidence that the last part of that word is action.
Exactly.
Right? So you can't.
In fact, that was the missing piece from The Secret.
Correct.
Love that, D. Thought it was great to introduce people to it, but the big chunk missing is your action.
So you've got to go and do something,
that
right?
Raises your vibration to the point of a new point of attraction.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, look, I've been working for many years, so I've got a bit of a safety net. And don't get me wrong, there have been times when I've been pretty close to the wire in terms of how am I going to pay the bills next month. At this exact moment in time, I go, you know what, I'm going to be able to pay the bills for a few more months before things go a bit tits up. Audience of one means, whenever you do something, you don't think about whether there's 10 people or a million people or whether there's 50,000 people listening to a podcast. You just communicate one-on-one. And I think sometimes people think, I'll start doing something or being something when I've got an audience. And the paradox is, well, no, you get an audience when you start doing something or being something. So when I put something on Facebook yesterday, I go, I wonder if 10 people will like it. And by the way, it was, a million words, right? So it wasn't an easy read. And we all know that social media is quite temporary. So, not everyone's there to read an essay. And then all of a sudden overnight, and I didn't have a million things, but, I had 200-300 people, whatever it was, and people were sharing it and all that. But, when I wrote it, I just wrote it for my audience of one. And so the same thing goes with businesses, I had to mentor some businesses the other day, and I said to them, I don't think the challenge is coming up with a good idea. The challenge is finding people who agree that your idea is good. Right? Because there's I had to Google it, but there's 7.4 billion people in the world. So the chances are there's going to be someone else who thinks your idea is good.
Yes.
So it's not trying to convince people or trying to come up with the idea. It's just, using technology or whatever, medium you can, to find enough of those people who agree with you so that it's viable or commercial, if that's one of your criteria.
Sputnik always has a new project on the go, or he has a new goal that he's set for himself, or perhaps it's a new visualization of something he's wanting to aspire towards. And he always has a very strong conscious intent. So I was curious to find out, what is he up to now?
I've just launched a new business where, I've made a point of not using money as my KPI. We had the official launch last week in Sydney at the She Went Wild Women's Adventure Expo. So I'm a bit of an adventurer. So I've partnered up in a business which is creating clothes and stuff for women only in the adventure space. It's a weird one to explain because I choose to say there is no brand, but the figurehead is an anonymous woman called Awesome Adventure Chick. Of course, the word's awesome in there if I'm involved with it.
That's right.
And so, it's T-shirts and cushion covers and pendants and all these sorts of things. And it's built around a philosophy that says adventure is my soulmate. The reason I mention that business is not to give it a shameless plug. It's because our goal was to create something beautiful. And I personally already deem that business to be a success because it's one of the purest executions of a vision that I've ever had, that I've ever been involved with, where I look at what the internal idea was, what the externalization of it is in terms of what that actual thing looks like, and I look at those things and I go, we've brought something beautiful into the world. It's an accurate and beautiful representation of the concept, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you've got something in your head, and for whatever reason, it
doesn't come out the same way.
And so, if it makes money, that would be fantastic. And I'm not going to lie, we have some quite lofty, ambitious goals for how many people we can affect. It's connected to women's causes around the world. So, one girl educating girls in Africa. Kiva loans, which
I love it. No, it wasn't. You didn't put me onto Kiva. I think I put you onto it today.
Oh, possibly.
I read it in Bill Clinton's book. He wrote a book about different ways that you can give. I can't remember what the title is. I'll look it up and I'll put it on the show notes. But there was the one thing I got out of it was Kiva.
Which is micro loans rather than flat out donations. So, you make a loan of $25 and then they pay it back 9 cents at a time, or maybe they default or whatever.
How quickly I've got paid back by so many people. That's really, because this helps them. But I'm amazed at how often I get that email that says, you've been paid back $3.41 for this person. But it's very quick that money's back in. So my thing is, as soon as because I've done many over the years, when I then go, okay, there's 25 there, I'm going to refinance someone else, I then keep another 25 in. So that's compounded over the years. Yeah. It's a very cool thing. So Kiva, KIVA.org. Check it out and get amongst it. It's awesome. So that's one of the supporting and the educating women in Africa. Female children in Africa.
Because I spend a lot of time either working or travelling or guiding tours in places like Cambodia, I lived there for a while.
You lived there for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, so I've got some sort of personal relationships, and so one of my missions has been not just to support organisations, but I've got a family, for example, that I help directly over there, so it's not a...
They recently had some trauma, didn't they?
Yeah, there was a flood there about this time last year, and I happened to be in Cambodia at the time and didn't make the news, and I texted him quickly, and I thought it was just one of those courtesy texts to say, hey, you okay?
Yeah.
And when he texted back...
mate, it wasn't me.
Yeah, and he's got a little girl at the time. She was 3, and they hadn't eaten for 3 days. So basically the Chinese who operate the dam on the main river there had opened it late in the day and accidentally let way too much water out, so their houses are all on stilts to allow for water level changes in the river, but their houses got flooded even on stilts. So the main road was underwater, and they had to, at 11 o'clock at night, so pitch black, go down the main road in rafts and boats and...
That would be bizarre, wouldn't it?
Oh, look, and to be there a few days afterwards was, mind-boggling, because by then a lot of the water had receded. The road was, above water level again. But I texted him on a Sunday afternoon and said, is everything cool? And he goes, well, actually, we haven't eaten for 3 days. He was discriminated against because they said, we're not giving you any aid because you've got friends who are Burrans, which are Westerners. So because he's a tour guide, they know that he's got Western friends, so they assume that he'll get looked after. No one had, so if I hadn't texted him.
Wow.
And let me just tell this story, because this is my favourite thing, right? So you can wire transfer money through mobile phones there. So I go, I'm going to send you $100 right now so that you've got enough to get you through the night, and then I'll come down tomorrow. And keep in mind, and if this sounds discriminatory, I'll wear this, but certain countries have different values and ideas around money. So if I just sent him a lot of money,
Yes.
it wouldn't necessarily have been used and distributed in the most effective way, right?
Right.
So I thought I'll send him $100 just so that they can eat, and then I'll go down there tomorrow and I'll make sure that, I'll find out what they need and
And then go and
facilitate.
get it. Yep.
So when I got down there the next day, Sarat, who's my friend, came to me and said, "Look, I hope this is okay. I'm so sorry." And I went, "Oh, what have you done with $100? And he said, "Well, the lady next door, her husband's a fisherman and he's away on a fishing trip and she's got 3 kids. So I gave $50 to them so that they could buy."
Bless him.
So here's this guy with his own little daughter whose whole house has been just about washed away. I sent him $100 and the first thing he does is give $50 of it to his next door neighbour. So,
that heart, that soul, I know in my life, I just haven't been tested like that. I would love to think I'm that person, but I don't know.
That would give $50 away?
Well, that would give, I don't know. I really hope in the bottom of my soul I am that person.
Yeah. You never
it's
know.
It's the person I want to be, but we don't know until we're in it. That's gorgeous.
So we'll be paying for his daughter to go to school. So she's nearly at school age. So it's great to give money to organisations who support all kinds of people, but I really wanted some of it to be personal. And so after that, we then raised a whole bunch of money.
I feel this is really important. Look, a friend of mine runs the Hudson Mum Foundation, and it's named after her son that passed away from an illness. And she is the one that deals with every single one of the families that she supports and helps. And they have this beautiful annual fancy dress, big ball thing. And she invites the families that they've helped for that year and the children to come along. And it is so, it just does something different to your soul, to your heart, when you've got that direct connection. As you said, this is more about, it's that money's money, and very easy for us to say, living in an abundant society, that we can go, I can throw some money around and help out. But it's a whole other thing when you get to see it in action, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just more personal. It's not an abstract concept, and that's not to say I don't think those, organisations don't do an amazing job at scale. Okay,
we need it, absolutely. Well, Kiva is one. Yeah. That's a version of it.
But for me, even with Kiva, when I can look at pictures of, this person and that's their name and they're from that country and this is what they're actually borrowing their money for, I know that when you, this is one of those great marketing things, right? When you sponsor a World Vision kid,
the World Vision, and you get the photo of the child.
Yes, does your money actually go to that actual kid for that actual thing? And I think, we all know that some of those things are, maybe yes, maybe no, depending on the organisation. Or, if you buy a chicken, does it actually buy a chicken?
Well, yes. Having said that, I have sponsored through World Vision for decades. And one time I used to, prior to having my children, I used to sponsor teenage boys because apparently they were the hardest for World Vision to get sponsorship for.
Not cute enough.
Not cute enough. Yeah. And I went, no, that's cool. And my thinking was that, well, if they're teenage boys, because the sponsorship stops at 18. And so I thought, I'll actually be helping more children because I'll only be with a child for a certain period, a shorter period of time. And so I sponsored this teenage boy, and within, I think, about 2 or 3 months, I got a letter from World Vision saying that sponsorship, unfortunately, sometimes we identify a community that we believe needs help, and we knew this one desperately needed help, but sometimes we've moved in too late.
Oh, okay.
And so basically the whole village just upped and moved. They just left. They didn't trust what they had heard from the World Vision people, and they took their own path. But to their credit, I quickly got the email saying, back then letter saying, we're sorry, we're moving on. By the way, enclosed is here another person you might like to sponsor. But hey, whatever, the intent. It's about the intent, isn't it, which is beautiful. And so I love that you have put such a beautiful intent behind, what's it called again?
So that one's Awesome Adventure Chick.
Awesome Adventure Chick.
And look, and it's so, like I say, the launch was only about 10 days ago. There's no products on the website. It's just a basic, couple of pages at the moment. So that's what we're in the process of doing literally at the moment. And it has got great intent, to support those causes. And it's another example where this is, let's call it, male, white, privileged male, I'm in that category. Sorry, but, that's how I was born. So, I probably didn't have a full appreciation of some of those causes. So we decided to support them. And then when one girl, for instance, sent me their document saying, this is what we do, I cried reading it. And so retrospectively
This is the document from
the organisation when we were trying to decide who we would support.
Right. Yes.
I said, can you send me some information on what you do? And there were two reasons I decided to support them. One is because the document was compelling and heartbreaking and, I could see there was a real need. And two was because one of the specific things they said they did was Awesomify schools or something and make them more, because there weren't bathrooms for the girls to use and stuff. So that was they made it more awesome. So I thought, that's right up our alley.
Buddy's thing is awesome and stay the hell away from ordinary. That's one of his biggest sayings.
Yeah, and look, that's what I was starting to say before about, and this is a really important thing, and it's an Australian cultural thing. When I said it was hard before to write a manifesto, what I noticed about that is, particularly in Australia, I think words like awesome are a bit taboo because they're a bit.
Who do you think you are?
A bit American and a bit,
We've got the tall poppy syndrome where, if you act above your station in life, then people will want to cut you down.
Yeah, and
very different to what I perceive in American culture to be.
Yeah, and I think what happened early on with that business and what's really difficult for me still now is, so our catchphrase for Swashbucklers originally and still now was ordinary is my enemy, right? So we have T-shirts and, all this sort of stuff. And what I noticed about that psychologically is it's a double negative,
yes,
right?
Yes, that's right.
Right,
yes.
So it's saying what we're not instead of saying, because if you went out and said, I'm awesome, right? Yeah. But you say, okay, well, I'm not ordinary, or ordinary is my, it's not even saying I'm not ordinary, it's just ordinary is my.
And everyone can link into that, can't they, and go, yeah, I'm a bit of a daredevil, or I'm a bit of a rebel, or I'm a bit of an activist, or I'm a bit of a whatever, outspoken person.
But we don't say what you are.
We don't,
say,
they will think that and hook in on it. That's clever.
And then, but I really wanted something expressed in the positive, and I didn't want it to sound smug or grandiose. So one of the things that you read before was this thing called the relentless pursuit of wow. So, that for me is now part of my driving force when I'm deciding whether I'm going to do something or not. I go, is this part of the relentless pursuit of wow? And in fact, we then started a little side business called the Ministry of Wow.
Oh, true.
So we have a business that just does content creation for outdoor, active and adventure brands. And so we, spun off out of this world and called it the Ministry of Wow because we wanted to create content that made people go wow. And that's
fantastic. What fun!
That's as close as we get to sort of being, backslappers and going, aren't we great? Because it's not really aren't we great, but the content's kind of cool.
As a free thinker and a really innovative problem solver, I was really keen to know what situation Sputnik is currently pondering. So I asked him what kept him awake at night.
So here's what's keeping me awake at night at the moment. And let me start by saying this is one of those times where I'm incredibly insecure and vulnerable to express this opinion because I imagine that there are much more well-educated, smarter, articulate people who have talked about these concepts, but this is what's keeping me up at night at the moment. I had a conversation the other day I've got a 19-year-old son, and so we were talking about this whole new gender fluidity, binary neutral sort of concept. And as a guy in my 40s, late 40s at that, this is a bit challenging for me because not how I was brought up, right? I was brought up, guys are guys and, women are women and, that's it, So I'm pretty open-minded, so I'm open-minded to it all. And a couple of things have all sort of conspired to happen. So I decided a couple of months ago, and you're going to go, hang on a minute, 1 minute we're talking about gender, 1 minute we're talking about this next thing, but I'll bring them together.
It's all right, we like the rabbit hole.
So I decided to drive up to Uluru, right, Ayers Rock in the old language, and I've never been there. I've been, all over the world, but I've never been to, one of our own sort of amazing things.
The planet.
And so for anyone who doesn't know, it's, I don't know, maybe sort of 1,600 kilometres away or something. So it's a fair old drive.
In the middle of nowhere.
So I basically hired a car because I didn't have a car that would make it that distance. So I hired a car, jumped in the car and just drove up there, for a couple of days. There's something to do. And I had a bit of a, I'm not as ethereal and, I'm not as cosmic as some people.
He's not into the weird and wacky as much as we are, but that's okay. We forgive you.
But I had a couple of little moments. Right?
You did. If you're going to have them, that's where you'll have them.
And a couple of these moments, which I'll bring back to the gender issue and what keeps me up at night at the moment. The first one was there's an awful lot of nothing out there, right? It's not like there's forests and mountains or anything. I mean, for hundreds of kilometres at a time, there's kind of literally nothing. There's a little bit of basic scrub and that's it. And I was driving along, and by the way, that was exactly what I needed at the time. And then you drive along and then there'd just be a fence. And I thought, how fucking absurd that someone's turned up at some point and gone, I might have this bit, and built a fence, right? And, as we know historically, wherever you're from, Indigenous people in all kinds of countries got a pretty rough deal where other people came along and went, oh, no one owns this because they didn't build any fences, so I'll build a fence.
I'll build a fence.
So, and I guess I knew that intellectually, but to see a fence out in the middle of nowhere where someone's come up with this random arbitrary line where they would call something theirs, that kind of struck me. I then drove into Alice Springs, and as is well documented or reasonably well documented, again in a lot of places, Indigenous people have struggled to adapt to the way of life that we've enforced. And there are a lot of Indigenous people sitting on the side of the road, and my knee-jerk reaction, and I'll go on public record as saying this was, what the fuck are they doing sitting there? And then I thought, oh, they're doing what they've always done. It doesn't fit with what we've built around them.
Yeah, because they've had to put a bit of concrete and bricks and mortar there.
They're sitting in their land, and I thought, oh. So, the construct that we've applied sort of hit me. And so then I was talking to Cruz, my son, about this gender thing, and I said, none of it's real, right? And when you go, well, what do you mean none of it's real? Like, none of it's real. So we're sitting here on a Wednesday, and there isn't a Wednesday, right? We just made that up.
Made it up.
And everyone's talking about how we had a hailstorm last week that, did all this damage, and there's been floods, and everyone's going, oh, spring, is late this year. But spring's not late because there is no spring. We've tried to apply words and definitions to nature so that we all kind of know roughly what's coming next. It's going to be hot. But that's not a real thing. And we're sitting here and I met you at 4 o'clock, but 4 o'clock's not a thing either, right? This is just, we made all this stuff up. And so when we started to look at gender, and by the way, like I say, there's probably scientific studies and stuff, right? But I don't really care
if you're it from your words.
If you're a creationist or a religious person or whatever. But I went, what we do know as a fact, right? And this is the only thing I know as a fact, is that if a man gets together with a woman and breeds, that they can breed. Not necessarily, but that's at least possible. They have a possibility of it. And we know for a fact that if a man gets together with a man and a woman gets together with a woman, that they can't biologically reproduce on their own, right?
Yeah.
So we know that as a fact, but everything else after that, so whether you're religious or a creationist, we don't know that doesn't mean that men and men weren't supposed to get together.
That's right.
Or that women and women weren't supposed to get together. And in fact, if you look at the world and how overpopulated it is, it may well have been that if you don't consider reproduction and as the biological imperative, right? So we all go, it's the survival of a species that, so that must be the natural thing.
We're surviving pretty well. There's 7.3
I would argue we're not surviving pretty well because we're all breeding to, more than, So what if the imperative wasn't biological? What if it was spiritual and the spiritual imperative was just to love? Right? And what if the spiritual imperative was it was okay for a man to love another man and they just wouldn't breed, and it was okay for a woman to love another woman and they wouldn't breed, and then there would be the breeding people who would be the man and the woman. So out of these combinations, whether they were men or women and whatever the current language is, what if just some of those people, their natural thing was that they would be the people that would breed? But everyone else is basing what's normal and not normal on a pretty fucking big assumption, right? Because we don't know that wasn't natural, right? We've got X hundred years of, this is how it is. It's natural for a man and a woman. It's natural for a man and a woman to breed, right? There's no one who can argue with that, right? This is biologically possible or not possible, right? But everything else is just made up.
I love it.
Right? And you can go back as far as you want, but we don't know that cavemen weren't hanging out with other cavemen and cave women weren't hanging out with other cave women.
If we look back in history, I mean, same-gender relationships were well documented and flaunted and casual and some were serious, and it was an everyday way of existence. It's more recent times that there's been shame around same-gender relationships and all that. What I am loving, a couple of things I want to say there is that I'm loving the number of children, and interesting your son is 19 years old, because there's a lot of children that are the teenage years, but also seeing up to, I don't know, roughly around mid, maybe even late 20s. They're just not seeing gender. So if you say, are you straight, are you bisexual, are you gay, are you lesbian, whatever, they're not identifying with any of it. They just are. And they connect with love. And if the person that they are connected on a soul level with happens to be the opposite gender, well, at the current way of our society, they're going to have an easier time of it, but they really don't care. And I love that, and I think that's exciting.
Yeah, and of course the challenge is the same challenge that Indigenous people have when, the culture around them is enforcing certain kind of cultural norms. Okay, so it's all very well to say, I don't identify with any particular gender, but then you get a job and you've got to decide which bathroom you're going to use. And suddenly there's, people having conniptions over, when are you using the men's bathroom or the women's bathroom? Because as it stands now, and let's not forget.
But again, you've got individual cubicles. If people come into my home, men and women use the same bathroom in my home.
But homes are still different. Like when I worked in Cambodia, I was back there for a 3-month contract last year, and our toilet on our level, our bathroom, only had a curtain into the actual bathroom. There was a urinal on the wall for men, and then there was a cubicle right behind it. So you could be, as a man, standing up using the urinal when a woman would just walk past you to go and use the cubicle. And that was massively challenging. Should I use the cubicle? And what if I'm standing there and a lady walks in? But, for them, I'll just, but over there, they'll just, stop and urinate on the street, so it's not an issue. But the thing I was going to say is it's not that long ago that we didn't have bathrooms for people with disabilities, right? We had a men's bathroom and a women's bathroom, and then someone went, this is not really practical for people who can't use these bathrooms easily. So now it's, I think, legislation in a lot of places that says, hey, if you're going to build a new building, you've got to make sure that, it's accessible and there's some way for those. So it's not inconceivable that in the very near future, when people are planning buildings, they will completely rethink how they build bathrooms.
Yes.
So there'll either be a fourth bathroom, or even better, there'll just be bathrooms built in a way where anyone can use them in a
each is an individual one, and you just go into whichever one is vacant.
And look, let's not pretend there's not practical issues with that because, space and design and all those things, but they'll work it out, right? I mean, they can work out
they'll work it out.
But in the meantime, it poses, and we've seen what's happened in, I think it was Walmart who said we're going to be supportive of people who, want to use the bathroom based on how they identify.
Yes.
But, that causes angst for a lot of people because they're worried about safety issues. What if a guy just wants to go on the women's toilet, which isn't the sense of it or the spirit of that. I don't know if we've gone off track, but
we've gone totally off track. I don't even know what track we're on. It doesn't matter. I like it like this.
But that's certainly what's keeping me up at night. So to put that in a nutshell, it's that some things are so ingrained in us culturally that we forget that they're not real and that they're made up. Because, there are certain things, if we come along and they're new concepts, we go, oh, that's a new thing, that's a made up thing. But there are also lots of things that we consider as a given that if you go back far enough in the thinking, we realise that somebody made them up and we just all agreed to agree
to go along with it.
Because it makes, if I say to you 4 o'clock, and, then I know roughly what time I'm going to be here and you know roughly what time. But there are big parts of that we now fight about because we all decided on one definition and then perhaps someone else thinks there's another definition. We're so wedded to our own ideas and other people are wedded to theirs, but both of them are generally speaking made up.
That's a very high spiritual concept that you've really grasped from that. In the final part of my conversation with Sputnik, we talked about image, courage, authenticity, and creating balance. Have a listen.
And the thing about, the dressing up thing, I mean, just because you have courage doesn't mean it's permanent either. You go through roller coasters of times when you're feeling strong and confident. I remember then, so, in those years, you also have less on the line when you're young. I didn't have a career, I didn't have a profile, I didn't have, clients, I was just some little guy. Yeah, so, it's easy to be fearless when there's nothing on the line. And, I remember, I don't know how long ago it would be, maybe sort of 10-ish years ago. And, I was sort of rediscovering that physical creative expression where I'd come out of, trying to be married and, be normal and have a picket fence and all that. And I thought, no, I've still got a bit of that crazy in me, so I'm going to let it out. And I really wanted to paint my nails. And I'd always painted my nails when I was about, 16 and I had, black nail polish and crazy nails and all this. And so I went, I'm going to do that again. And I was really scared. And so what I did was I painted just my thumbnail black. And I went, I'm going to do that for a while and just see what happens because I don't want to get shit and I don't want it to cause trouble with work or anything. So I painted that black and then kind of like, that seemed to go okay. So then I painted my whole left hand black and, got a few weird comments and looks and all that. And then I did both hands and I went, oh no, both hands is actually a bit much. Don't ask me where the logic in that is. But basically ever since that day, but it was hard to do. And ever
Have you
since
still got them painted on one of them
they're
now?
a bit chipped now.
Yeah, but you've
but
always had the chips.
and
That was part of it, I reckon. It was
being chipped, being too neat. So, but that was really hard to do. And of course, now I'm at a stage where, the last 5 years, even just 5 or 6 years ago, I was still rocking a bit of guy liner every now and again, or some, sort of tartan pants, or whatever it was. Whereas now I've gone down this adventure angle. So here I am sitting here with my scraggly hair and my beard and just a regular t-shirt, but I've still got black nail polish. And even I'm going, oh, does it fit? Is it still who I am? I'm not really sure anymore. So,
I love that it's about who you are. It's not actually an image. It's a feeling, isn't it? It's a feeling of who you are and how you wish to be expressing who you are.
But I still have to be conscious of, I've got a quasi sponsorship in the adventure field where I have an adventure clothing company give me gear and I'm in photos and stuff. And I still have to be a little bit conscious of how I represent that brand or my own business. So, I walk into a meeting and I always talk about, normally you walk into a meeting and you start at 0 and you've got to work your way up to 10 to impress someone. I kind of walk in, I'm probably at about a -5 or a 6 off the bat because I introduce myself and my name's Sputnik and, I kind of lose a few points automatically. And if I don't keep my
left hand points with me.
If I don't keep, but different strokes, if I don't keep my left hand hidden and they see the black nail polish, I lose a couple more points. And I have to work extra hard just to get back to 0. And we can sit here and go, oh, it shouldn't matter, but, it's planet Earth.
It does, and we are in 2016 and we are living in a very sophisticated Western society, and we can either make it easy for ourselves or hard for ourselves. It's like choose your battles, isn't it?
So I guess the point I'm making is that I still have to find that courage at times. Sometimes it comes naturally, but there are still plenty of times. So I don't think anyone should think, that people get it and then you're just automatic. It's no different to a muscle, right? You can go and work out in the gym for a year, get all your muscles. You don't then just do nothing forever and still keep all those muscles, whether it's emotional muscle or spiritual muscle, all the same rules apply. So for me, I still need to be disciplined and focused. And, there are still days when I feel like shit. And, this week's been really tough for me, for instance, with everything that's going on and, with American elections and the hatred and the aggression and, all those things have been really tough on me spiritually. I don't mind admitting that. And, that you take a bit of a hit over those times. And it doesn't matter how self-assured you are, that manifests in all sorts of ways. So you don't just magically get somewhere and things are magically easier. What you do is get incrementally better. And in fact, I watched Obama's exit speech yesterday, and he finished off with something which is a theme that I use a version of now. So my current theme that I'm about to sort of start exploring, when I talk to kids, I start off with a graphic that says anything is possible, and I cross out anything and make it awesome is possible. And the reason I say that is because, let's be honest, anything isn't possible. If I want to be an NBA player right now, that's probably not possible, right?
I'd like to say this, but no, I think you're right there.
So let's just agree that, there are certain things that actually aren't possible. So let's not piss about and go, oh, you can be anything you can't, right? I can, my eyesight's going. There are probably certain things that I couldn't join the army if I wanted to, not that I wanted. So there are certain things but what is possible is awesome. And Obama's speech, he got right to the end of this speech. It was an amazing speech. I think he's a wonderful leader. I think his presidency was flawless, but I think he did some amazing things. And at the end, he said, the guiding light for us is we ask if what we're doing is making things better. And he goes, perfect is unattainable, better is good, right?
Nice.
Or better is possible. And I thought, that's a bit like my awesome is possible thing. So you might not be able to do absolutely anything, but you can always do something awesome. So that's kind of become my core theme. I'm about to start writing my next book, which will be kind of based around that.
You have to let me know when that's ready because he's written some fabulous books. So one of them, and he always has really cool titles. So there's The Swashbuckler's Guide to Becoming an Astronaut.
Which is nothing about becoming an astronaut, but about getting into the creative fields. And the other
Tell me your other book is...
The Swashbuckler's Guide to Running Away from Dinosaurs, which is just about running. But,
and how to live life less ordinary, such as how to climb volcanoes and eat spiders. You've got all sorts of... This guy has so much going on. It's fabulous.
I should say I'm mostly vegetarian. I still eat a little bit of seafood, but I have eaten the fried tarantulas in Cambodia just because I needed to know.
It's kind of bucket list.
I'm not gonna lie. I had a couple of spiders.
Not on my bucket list. It's absolutely not. Spuddy, what a pleasure. Thank you for sharing so much of your wisdom, your journey, your stories. I reckon that's a great way to end it, where we encourage people to be awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me in. Thanks to anyone who made it this far through that rambling sort of zigzag journey.
Down the rabbit hole, left, right, centre, back up, whatever.
And, my offer to anyone always is, I don't have, 500 million fans. So if anyone ever wants to reach out, I'm pretty easy to find on, Facebook or any of those places.
We'll put the links up to your pages and your websites and things. I'll get those all put up under the episode so you can check out Spuddy, and I might even see if he'll let me put up this gorgeous photo that he put up on Facebook yesterday with the love heart and the angel wings. So thank you so much.
See you guys.
Ordinary is the enemy. And that certainly is the catch cry of Sputnik. I hope that you've enjoyed listening to his wisdom and becoming a little bit more motivated to step up and go even bigger and bolder than you currently are. For all of the links to contact Sputnik in various different forms, please head to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/lovelifeshow, or you can visit our website, which is lovelifeshow.com. And until next week, I hope you have an amazing week, living life a little bit bolder than you have before. I'm Jane Donovan. Blessings and gratitude.
Life is perfect, I'm not trying, it's just happening. And it's a beautiful day.